Welcome to Hollywood Insider Help, where you can learn more about how to earn a good living as an author, screenwriter, producer, or podcaster. Remember, you can find great live and on-demand training designed to help you earn a good living making media you love at nancyfultonmeetups.com and nfm24.com. Our host is Nancy Fulton. Let's dive in.
Tonight we're going to be talking about making a film or a web series with friends as partners, and the reason that I want to do this particular event, or the reason that this event is important, is because many of us aspire to work with it's kind of the peak experience that we can imagine, not just producing a film, not just producing a web series, but getting to work with the kind of people that we really like. And the longer we've been in the industry and the more friends we've got, the more intense that desire becomes. Sometimes it can turn into something pretty terrible if you don't really have the right advice or the right insight. And I have worked actually in many long-term creative and collaborative partnerships, both good and bad. And I have furthermore, because I've worked to teach people how to start businesses for 8 years, and previous to that, I worked in a lot of instructional capacities. I've had the opportunity to watch lots of people try to start businesses together, particularly really good friends or people who were really great collaborators, professional collaborators who thought, okay, let's strike out on our own. And I've had kind of a window seat on some pretty exciting disasters. So the information that I'm presenting in this workshop comes from a significant experience watching partnerships develop and fall apart, and seeing those that did well versus those that didn't. So hopefully the information that I'm sharing will prove useful to you and may help you sidestep some hassles that you might run into. The first thing I want to start with is that I'm not a lawyer, and this document is no replacement for legal advice offered by an attorney, specifically when it comes to working with friends or family members. You should always consult the appropriate legal and tax advisors to avoid making expensive mistakes, no matter who you are doing business with. The rules do not change because you are working with a friend or a family member. In fact, I would suggest that it's more important to be careful about the legalities of situations when you're working with friends and families, specifically because you want to have them, want to work with them whether the business venture is successful or whether it fails. Most of us working in the entertainment industry develop close personal, professional, and creative relationships with people who share our vision for the kinds of projects we want to produce. Some of us are even fortunate enough to have family members in the industry who want to work with us with the intent of bringing common dreams to fruition. And the entertainment industry is rife with a bunch of people who have been very successful doing this. The Coen Brothers, the Wachowskis, Michael Bay, Brad Fuller, and Andrew Form. These people have created long-term relationships that have created vast wealth and great projects and have influenced the entertainment industry for decade after decade after decade. And many of us aspire to that. And it's not something that we shouldn't aspire to. It's just something that as we move forward on turning into a reality, we have to be careful about the kinds of mistakes that derailed those objectives. I think the place to start is to think about what makes successful partnerships work. Now, probably one of the most famous collaborative teams in the entertainment industry is Penn and Teller. And they've been creative and producing partners for more than 40 years. And it's interesting that they attribute their mutual success specifically to the fact that their relationship is strictly professional. They almost never socialize with one another. They work together 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week with great success, but their focus is and always has been being great business partners rather than being great friends. Working with friends and family is guaranteed to cause changes in personal and professional relationships because the stresses and responsibilities increase over time, and the mutual dependence increases over time, and the daily expectations increase. When things click in a business created by family and friends, the businesses are very, very strong and they're very long enduring. But when they don't, the fallout is both expensive and dramatic. Now, as you think about working with friends or family members, and particularly the ones that you like best and thus want to work with, usually when you describe that relationship and describe why you like that person, you mention the things that you have in common. For example, you might say, well, they're verbal like me, or they're financially responsible like me, or they're whimsical and funny like me, or they know a good joke or a good story when they hear one like me. They're technical like me. They enjoy good friendly competition like me. And those traits are incredibly important to friends and family members that you want to have good relationships with. Those commonalities, those common traits are what you bond on. And they're what reinforce both you and the person that you're talking to in such a fashion that you can make each other stronger over time. You reinforce the traits that you have in common with one another. And you gain a lot of emotional security because you're reinforcing these traits that you like about yourself. When you look at successful partnerships, the things that make the partnership successful, you would expect to be some of the things that make your friendship or your family relationship with somebody strong. You might say, well, we share the same vision for the kind of company we want to be a part of. We want to produce the same kind of work. We like the same people and they like us. But the problem is that producing a film or a web series is fundamentally a business activity. And successful partnerships, strong partnerships, are born because the people that found them have traits and features that make up for one another's deficiencies. So it's not the traits that you have in common that make a partnership that's successful. It's the traits that you don't have in common. It's the strengths that you don't share that make you stronger. You need to have complementary personality types and capacities in order for a good partnership to work. So, for example, you might have one partner that happily dives into projects with a passion and great determination, and the other one who holds back to assess the risks and the costs. You might have one person who's the people person, who creates great, strong interpersonal relationships, works hard to understand and accommodate the individual needs of the customers that you're working with. And you have another partner that sets standards and holds people to account. He's the one who says when a customer asks for a change, why are we giving him that? That's not what we agreed to. And the other partner is saying, well, because we want to make him happy and because he needs it for whatever reason. That conflict between people, between partners, makes the relationship stronger because it means decisions are well considered. And it means that when one party is exhausted and doesn't want to go any farther, the other one has the strength to say no to something, or has the strength to say, come on, let's just go a little bit farther and achieve this objective that we've set for ourselves, or fulfill this agreement that we've made. You might have one partner who's a visionary genius, who's always is always making the next great leap forward, who's always doing the thing that people thought impossible. And you have another hardworking guy behind him who makes good on all the promises that the company makes, who doesn't take the great leaps forward, but goes in and fills in the blanks to make sure that what's delivered is not only brilliant, but also good, also well made. A successful long-term partnership depends upon complementary skills and strengths, and good partners understand, value, and rely on those differences in order to achieve success. The next thing that's important to understand about great partnerships is that they are based on shared values. And we hear the word values all the time, but most of us don't understand exactly what the word means functionally. Values underpin most of the decisions that you and I make every day. If you value being healthy and attractive, you make time for the gym. If you value being artistic, you make time to invest in your craft. Shared values allow partners to predict and agree with what their partner's instinctual behavior and off-the-cuff decisions are likely to be across a wide variety of situations. Partners who share certain values, hire staff members who share those values as well. And thus the teams that they build are able to achieve their founders' objectives more efficiently. Values in a partnership have to be the same. They should not be different, because otherwise it will tend to create ongoing strife and ongoing hardship. And I'll go ahead and let's talk about two different partnerships and see how difference in values would play out for those partnerships. So let's say that you've got a partnership and two fellows who've decided that they're going to run a business or produce a project, let's say. The partners agree that they have an obligation to make good on the promises to investors. If, due to any unforeseen delay, a project has to change radically in order to come in on time and under budget, radical changes will be made. This means firing crew member who has suffered a severe personal crisis because the show must go on. That's fine with them. These partners agree that they will never take shortcuts or cut corners that might in any way jeopardize anyone's safety. And these partners might agree that the budget is the budget and coordinate throughout the entire day to keep the entire project financially on track. Neither one of these partners is going to make big expenditures without consulting the other one first. So this is one kind of a partnership. In partnership two, partners agree that their allegiance is to one another and to their shared vision. And investors are a necessary evil, and disclosure of operational details to investors isn't necessary as long as the film is ultimately going to be profitable. These partners might agree that some rules were made to be broken. They work together to shoot without permits. They might work with volunteers or interns routinely. And while they would never actively endanger someone, never actually try to hurt someone, the important thing to them is that they get the shot they need to make the movie. And if that means cast and crew spend 10 days shooting in an underwater scene in a 40-degree pool, and they have to keep paramedics standing by just because, hypothermia happens, that is part of the filmmaking experience. These partners agree that either partner can spend big sums without asking the other partner for approval. There's a lot of partnerships, obviously, in the entertainment industry that sort of operate this way. I mean, there's historic stories about great partnerships where the partners had great license to do all kinds of things that they wanted to do without a lot of oversight from other partners. As long as the money kept pouring in, as long as films kept going out the door, nobody was going to look at Harvey Weinstein and say, hey, stop being mean to all those girls, because the people with whom he was working apparently seemed to think that was okay, as long as great films kept being made and as long as money kept pouring in. Now, if you have somebody who would, one of the partners from partner one and one of the partners from partnership two, if they actually end up in the same company, they're going to be in constant conflict because they do not have an underlying set of values that they believe on. They do not agree that the same things are right and wrong. They do not agree that the same objectives are what we should be pursuing. They don't agree about how to treat people. They don't agree about what customers and investors are due. They don't have anything in common. And that's going to cause ongoing strife day after day, hour after hour, minute after minute. Every decision that each one of them instinctively makes is going to be wrong based on what the other one values. Now, the important thing to understand about values is that they're hardwired. It's not something that you can change. People fundamentally believe in their values, and if they have to operate against them for any length of time, particularly without any financial reward, they tend to become quite dysfunctional because it's really hard to second guess every decision you make all the time. If I'm a partner and we're working together, and what I really value in my working relationships with underlings is that they do exactly what I tell them to do and nothing more. If I give them an instruction, I expect them to carry it out at all costs. And if they fail to perform, I'm going to fire them. And meanwhile, you're a much different kind of employer. What you like when you hire somebody is that they think for themselves. And when they run into a problem, they come forward immediately and tell me that there's a problem, and they let me give them additional instruction. And if I'm not available, they find a way to achieve the objective, by doing whatever it takes to get it. They think for themselves and do whatever it takes in order to achieve the objective. And I don't really care if they do it differently than I instructed them to. And also, if they need to do it, if it's going to take longer or something like that, a few hours longer, or something's going to be different than I expect, I'm not going to blow my top. Well, that means when I hire people, they're not going to make you happy. And if you hire people, they're not going to make me happy. And that means that our dysfunctional relationship is going to be visible through every single employee that we hire, and every single deal that we do, and every single conversation or letter or email or document that we deliver to investors. We're going to be consistently at odds because we literally can't forget our underlying values. What does all this really mean to you? In order for you and your friends to be functional partners, you need to have skills that are different from one another, and they have to be complementary to one another. And you also have to have a set of large values that you both naturally adhere to strongly. Building a financially successful film or a web series project requires moving through a series of steps And you generally have to undertake those steps in a very specific order in order to minimize your risk and maximize the possibility of profit. You and your partner are going to have to go through script acquisition, getting script coverage, and optimizing and revising the script to make sure that it's as the best possible project for you to produce. You're going to have to go through financial analysis and forecast to determine how much this project is likely to make, so you don't spend $500,000 to make a movie that's not going to get any distribution at all. You have to go through the process of breaking down the screenplay, creating the shooting schedule, and creating the budget to determine the cost for the project. Then you're going to have to roll into pre-production, which means you're going to be signing union agreements, and those have long-term implications to your work. You're going to have to actually attach your crew, attach your cast, acquire the locations, etc. Then you're going to roll into production, and then you're going to roll into post-production. Then you're going to roll into distribution, and then the money's going to start coming in, which is monetization. And then you're going to have to pay back any investors that you worked with, and then you're going to have to start taking profits, both you and your partner. That's a lot of steps to go through if you're working with somebody who doesn't have complementary skills and doesn't have the same values that you do. So you can see why most times when people say that they're going to produce a film or a web series together, those projects fall apart. I mentioned in passing, if you don't understand the operations that I just mentioned in terms of how to actually produce a film or a web series, and you don't understand why they have to be undertaken in that order, there's the under 100K film blueprint and the up to $10 million film blueprint you might want to take a look at. And the only reason I mention that is a lot of times when people dive into producing a film, it may be the case that you've been a great DP for a decade, or you've been an amazing performer for 20 years. It could be you have the best possible track record. It could be that your partner has the best possible track record. But if you don't know the exact step-by-step process for producing a film, and if you and your partner haven't actually agreed on that process with one another, it means that you have even more stress involved in producing a project, because you don't even agree on the steps that you have to walk through one after the other in order to reach your objective. You and your partner have to have a plan, a shared reality-based plan of action to produce your project. You have to have diverse and complementary skills and strengths, and you have to have a broad range of shared values in order to be able to have a higher probability of success in building a profitable film or web series together. And that actually takes a lot of conversation and a lot of trial and error to make sure that you actually have met those conditions. Before you take on a project that's of any size, do something really small. Do something that's just, I don't really like short films, but do, a very low budget feature. If you're a writer and you've got a producer that you want to work with, instead of deciding to produce a film, maybe put up a little play. Like, can you get together to put together a play? Because even doing something really small starts to give you a good understanding of whether or not people get things done, and whether or not they make good on their promises, whether or not they're easy to work with, whether or not the work is fun, whether or not you feel energized working with them day after day. And those are really important things to know before you actually dive into doing something really big. The next topic I sort of want to address is that your natural instincts are going to serve you incredibly badly. Most people who are new to forming a business, and particularly if they like the people they're about to do business with, want to be fair, quote unquote. And this usually leads to some of the following behaviors. And, if you're currently thinking about starting a business with somebody, it may well be the case that you've actually started to engage in these behaviors already, which is why I'm giving you a heads up that you might need to step back and sort of rethink as a team. In an effort to be fair, you might be stating to one another that you're forming a partnership where the partners are equal right from the start. Because generally with friends, you do like to be equal, right? You don't have one friend that's better than another. You might be taking action on this supposition by creating a company. You might have an LLC, and you might be founded in both of your names, and you might even issue shares or percentages of ownership that so that you both legally own 50% of the company. You might be assigning partners the responsibilities they're most interested in undertaking, and maybe not the ones they're most experienced in doing. If I'm a DP and I've really always wanted to be a producer, and you've been a line producer, and you've always wanted to be a screenwriter, we might decide that you're going to write us a screenplay. We're going to take your screenplay that you've written, and we're going to let me, the DP who has never produced, take on a lot of the production and pitching roles. but I don't have that experience, and you don't have experience as a screenwriter. So because we like one another and we're trying to make one another's dreams come true, we have a tendency to say yes. Everybody gets the jobs that they want, even though they may not be experienced in doing those jobs, and even though the business may need to have somebody who's experienced doing those jobs. Finally, you may get in the habit of telling investors, key cast, crew, and other people that you're partners, that you're partners with one another. And you might do that even before you have all the details worked out. And every single one of these things will cause you significant problems later. So, partners forming a business need to be incredibly careful about saying that they're equal, because how much partners get compensated really has to be dependent upon the task that each partner is undertaking and how much those tasks, generally speaking, get paid. If that's not the case, the partner who's doing high value work is not going to have an ongoing incentive to keep within the partnership, right? If I'm a producer and I generally can produce projects where I, make $100,000 or $200,000 every single time I put together a project. I can make, let's say I can do 2 projects a year, and I can make half a million, $500,000 a year, pretty much all by myself. If you and I establish a partnership and you're the DP and my objective is to, and we decide that we're going to be equal, and yet one can hire a DP for $5,000 to $10,000 a week. And generally speaking, the DP might only have to work half the time or a quarter of the time that the producer is working. Can you see how you've got a constant mismatch between the reality of the work, how much that work normally pays, and how much money is going to be transferred from one person to the other if you adopt this partnership based upon trying to be even, right? It does turn into an ongoing problem, because there is a fundamental mismatch between what's the reality in the partnership and the reality in the real world. The rewards for what people get paid kind of has to be based upon what the real world normally pays for those jobs, not just saying, we're partners, so we have to be equal, so we have to get paid the same. If you have 2 partners in a company and somebody fails to perform their job. Let's say that I'm the producer and you're the DP, and we've decided to become co-producers on a project. Well, and I'm used to producing on my own, so I know how I like to do things. I know how quickly things go forward. And I'm taking less money because you're going to step up to the plate and be a producer, so I expect to be able to hand off jobs to you and hand off responsibilities to you. Well, what happens when you fail to perform? Who's going to take over that task? Chances are it's going to be me. So then how's the compensation going to work? Because you signed on thinking you were going to get paid X, Y, and Z, and you're a partner, a co-owner in this company, and all of a sudden, I'm demanding to get paid more because I'm taking over some of your jobs. It's just guaranteed to cause problems. Partners in an enterprise have to take on the tasks that they've undertaken successfully for others, or the team should take on small projects so that the partners can acquire the skills that they need in order to be fully qualified to move on to the task of taking on bigger projects where they're doing something they really haven't done before. The next thing is, you should never use the word partner, ever. From a legal standpoint, when you say you're somebody's partner, it's the same as saying that you're married. And if you think about it right now, if your wife were to take a car and go run over somebody on the street, your personal assets would be at risk, right? She's your wife, so when she commits a crime or she does something illegal or she does something terrible, your house is on the line. Everything that you own can be taken away. Future income can be taken away. When you're a partner in the state of California and in most states across the United States, when you actually say you're a partner and you don't have a corporation or an LLC that you're working through, it means you're personally a partner with them. It means that you're general partners with them. And if you Google general partnership, you'll see that it's one of the most risky relationships on earth, because it means that either party can negotiate and speak for the other as if they are one person. So instead of saying the word partner, you want to say things like, this is my co-producer and the director for the project, or this is my co-producer and the line producer for the project. So you don't present yourself as partners. You don't say, this is my partner in Film X. You say, this is my co-producer on Film X, and he's going to be taking over the line producer job. If a partnership is worth building and a project is worth doing right, and if you like your friends or your family members and you want to ensure that you remain close, it makes huge sense to build your business relationship carefully and to build it on the best advice, with the best advice you can get as a team. And I can't imagine there's many lawyers on earth which would recommend that you use the word partner to refer to one another, or that you create a partnership where you each have exactly the same percentage, the same percentage of ownership, and where your duties are not very strictly defined and your roles in the company are not very strictly defined. So that means that you and your partners, it could be the case, obviously you have more than one partner. That means that you and your partners have to take time to create a legal agreement between you. People working together to produce a project need to have that agreement because it describes their responsibilities, their compensations, and their rights. It outlines what happens if specific benchmarks aren't met, and it should outline what happens if partners disagree on what they're going to do and how they're going to go forward at any point in the business relationship. This agreement is absolutely critical, particularly if there are only two partners. The most dangerous kind of partnership is the one where there's only two partners, because you don't have a tiebreaker. So if you have three or four partners if you have 3 or 5 or some odd number of partners in a project, it is easier to make a decision, because ultimately you can say, well, we're going to do what most of us want to do. And the people that aren't happy about it, well, that's too bad. We agreed we were going to vote. And in fact, if you think about the way that companies are structured, usually the percentage of ownership that people have determines what percentage of control they have over the company. So when two people share 50% or 50% ownership of the company each, when they both own the company equally, you really are at an impasse if they can't figure out how to go forward. And the history of Hollywood is littered with production companies that fell apart because they reached an impasse, they couldn't come to a decision, and the project fell by the wayside. When you create a partnership agreement, you need to have it drafted by a lawyer. And some lawyers are going to incorporate the outline of obligations and dispute resolution solutions into the operating agreement of an LLC. So in effect, your partnership agreement becomes the operating agreement for the LLC that you use to produce your company. And other attorneys are going to strongly urge you to create a separate agreement, a separate document that documents the relationship you have to one another, and then to create an LLC, and that LLC may have this as an addendum, or it may be the case that the pair of you form a little corporation, and then the corporation owns the LLC. The attorneys will tend to ask you, is this the only film you're planning to do? Because if you're going to do multiple films, maybe you guys should form a corporation with one another, and you should have a partnership agreement that determines your control of that corporation. And then the corporation should actually own the LLCs, because the LLCs are going to have investors, and you'll want something to protect you. You want something that will protect you as the person running the LLC, as much as your investors are protected by the LLC, limited liability of the LLC. So there's a lot of issues that are involved in how you create the legal agreement between you. There's several different strategies for doing it, but you need to have one before you decide to embark on producing a project together. So another reason that it's important to have a partnership agreement is that when you have partners in creative endeavors, they tend to have the agreements, or the relationships that you establish tend to have some far-reaching obligations and long-term impacts. For example, if co-writers work together to create a screenplay, then they register the work at the Copyright Office in both their names. The copyright law currently says that their business relationship will legally last their lifetimes, plus another 75 years, just because they registered at the Copyright Office in both of their names. The business relationship is likely to live longer than any business that they start, and the rights in their screenplay will eventually be shared by the spouses, with their spouses while they live, and also heirs when they die. So let's say that you and I want to produce a project together. We co-write the script, and we register the Copyright Office in both of our names. And then you die. Well, and you have 2 kids. Well, now my partners, the people that own my screenplay with me, are me and your 2 kids. If you get divorced, then your wife has actually a percentage of ownership, as is kind of co-owners with you in your ownership of the screenplay. And the result of that is that the interesting result of that is that your um, if you get divorced, then all of a sudden your ex-wife, who may not like you, is suddenly my partner. And so we need to have agreements in place such that the screen we have, we continue to own the if we know how we're going to handle the ownership and control of the screenplay. And that's particularly true if we're going to co-produce it with one another, right? Because what happens if you happen to get divorced while we're producing the project? Does that mean I can't go forward because now all of a sudden your wife doesn't agree? So now where are we? Do I have to get her permission in order to go forward with the project? In effect, I've lost my rights because I don't have her permission in order to go forward. And that means that there's a huge number of strange impacts that can happen when you have that kind of shared ownership of a piece of intellectual property. So you just need to really think about how you're going to handle shared ownership of intellectual property, like a film, like a screenplay, like a song, etc. Producers who start a business to produce a project will be creating a film or web series that will be registered at the Copyright Office too. And so in the best of all possible world, it's going to be generating revenue for years, even after the production company has been dissolved. Producers are going to pay back loans, they're going to reward investors, they're going to take money in profits that the film has earned, and along with control, and together they're going to control how the film is distributed. So there's a lot of obligations that happen when people become partners. So when you're creating your partnership agreement, you and the person that you're working with, you're going to have two different attorneys. You don't want the same attorney. You're not hiring together an attorney to draft a partnership agreement. You're going to hire two different attorneys, each to represent, each one of you needs an attorney to represent your interests, and you're going to want to make sure that the attorney, both attorneys, understand that the objective is to work together and to make a good relationship that's got a strong foundation that makes it so that if you and they part companies, that it's not destructive. That it, and that there's a way to solve there's a way to resolve disputes that doesn't throw you into the courtroom, and there's a way to resolve problems in the business before you actually start turning to suing one another. So one of the things I think it makes sense for people who want to be partners to do, this is kind of the recommendation I have for anybody who's thinking about forming a partnership, is that they should start by creating a document that outlines what their plan of action is going to be, that outlines all the things that they're going to do and that they're going to work on together. And then from that, they should actually then go speak to lawyers who can turn that into a document that they can both sign. So you're going to start by determining what film or web series or script you're going to produce. And then you're going to go together. You're going to go hire a line producer for a week or two. And somebody that's not one of the two partners, even if one of the two partners could actually create the budget themselves. And you're going to hire the line producer to create the breakdowns, to do the shooting schedule for the project. And you want to make sure that you hire that outside voice, even if one of you is capable of producing the breakdown and the budgets and the day out of days and all that stuff. Even though there's somebody else that can do that's one of the two partners, it's better to have a third party do it, because you want to make sure that the information that's being presented is as accurate and as clear and as impartial as possible, as independent as possible. So it's better to have a third party do that. You want to have the line producer turn that information into a budget that outlines the full pre-production and post-production and production costs. And then you're going to add more stuff to that budget. You're going to add all the costs associated and all the timelines required to create your partnership agreement. All the costs associated with creating your production company, the LLC, all the costs associated with funding your project. In some cases, if you're doing something really small, like you're only doing like a $50,000 or $100,000 project, and you already know where you're going to get the money from, the documenting how you're going to fund the project might just be talking about when you're going to move money into the production company's bank account. But if you have to actually raise money from investors, or you have to solicit donations using Indiegogo or something like that, then you need to put those costs into this budget you're going to work on with your partner before you ever decide to move forward. you're gonna add the costs associated with finding distribution. You're gonna add the costs associated with packaging your project with key cast and crew, marketing your project after release, repaying your lenders, repaying your investors, filing your taxes, and then ultimately shutting down your production company, because every production company eventually shuts down. Otherwise, you're going to be paying $800 to the state of California for the next 200 years, and you're going to be filing federal taxes year after year after year after year. So at some point, you're going to have to shut down the production company. So what I'm recommending that you do is you create a budget and a timetable that outlines all of these tasks, all the tasks on this page and all the tasks on this page, to create sort of a grand plan for what the scope of your partnership is going to be, and to estimate the costs, and to estimate how long each of those steps is supposed to take, and to identify who is responsible for each of those things. Now, you're going to use this sort of complete budget and timeline and assignment document or spreadsheet as the basis for creating a partnership agreement with the help of your attorneys. And from this budget, you really can determine how much each of you is contributing to the project. You can determine who's got what responsibilities. You can come up with contingency plans in case somebody decides to back out, and finding out, what the costs of that are going to be. Or if somebody decides that, they don't want to do the job that they've been assigned, and they want to hire somebody to do it, where that money comes from. So creating this grand unified budget and using it as a basis to go and see an attorney and say, look, this is our plan, this is what we plan to do, and we've written it all down. What we want you to do now is create a partnership agreement that reflects this plan, and then help us make sure that we understand what's going to happen in case somebody fails to perform. Now, if you can't get through the steps of creating that sort of grand unified plan with a potential partner, then I think the chance of you getting through a movie with them is pretty low, and creating a web series is going to be even harder. If you can get through that, creating that budget with them, and you can get through creating the partnership agreement with them, chances are pretty good that you've got the foundation for a pretty good partnership and a pretty good relationship. You will also know by the end of that process how much each of you should be getting paid. Sorry, by the end of that process, you should know how much each of you is getting paid, how much the project's going to cost overall, and what you can expect in terms of reward when all is said and done. Doing this sets up sort of a trial run. And if things go badly, if it turns out that it's just not going to work, you haven't really lost anything. You didn't make commitments to any third parties. You didn't screw up a relationship with investors. You didn't hire employees that you now have to fire. You just basically said, it turns out we're not good partners with one another. We'll just go on being friends and family members, instead of trying to do this extra business thing on top of it all. Another thing that I like to mention, sort of as an option, is I think too many people decide that they want to produce a project together, and so they should be partners in a production company. And quite frankly, I think owning a business is really hard. And I own multiple businesses. So, you have to file taxes for them. You have to hire people. You have to fire people. There's state laws. You're responsible for ensuring that state laws are followed. It's just like the guy that owns the business sort of is the master of ceremonies for everything. Everything is his fault. It seems like it's a whole lot of power, but it's really mostly a whole lot of trying to make it so people don't, screw something up in such a fashion that, takes away everything you own. So most people who haven't owned a business only have a vague understanding of the obligations and responsibilities involved. And it's really not a lot of fun. So rather than having two or more people own a business, it might make sense for just one person to decide to own the business, and then to draft a set of agreements that define its relationship to the other folks that they want to work with. So if you and I were thinking about being partners to produce a film, I might very well look at you and say, look, I have no desire to own another business. So I'll tell you what, you own the business, and I will work for you. And we'll create a set of agreements to talk about what I'm going to do for you as part of the agreement. We'll talk about how much I'm going to get paid. We'll talk about what responsibilities and obligations I have. And we'll talk about when you can fire me, and we'll talk about when I can quit and what happens when that happens. And then I sort of have the best of both worlds, and so do you. You have the ability to own and control the company, and I have the ability to do the work that I want to do. And there's no possible way that we can come into conflict, the kind of conflict that partners have, because I understand that I'm not a partner, and I understand that you fully own the business, and that ultimately you're going to do whatever you have to do in order to make the business successful so you can, actually stay in business. And we both understand that we have contracts that govern our behavior. So nobody's trapped. You're not chained together. One of you can leave, can go on and do other things, and the other one can continue to own the company, finish producing the movie, to monetize it, and give the person who chose not to be their partner whatever the contract says that they're obligated to provide. So if you become the sole owner of a production company and you just make deals with the people that you would normally turn into partners, you have a lot of benefits. You don't have to continuously work and consult with your partner as you deal with legal, finance, and tax advisors to launch and run the company for a period of years. You have full control and responsibility for the business, including oversight of its bank accounts and all the business operations. And this provides you, as the owner of the company, with a lot more security than you're going to have if you do have a partner. When you have two people and they both have access to the bank accounts and they can both write checks all of the time and they can both get credit cards that draw money off the company's credit, it can become quite problematic to manage the finances. If you own the company, you've got a direct relationship with the investors. You're also accountable for keeping them up to date on your business operations and providing them with compensation or an explanation of how you lost their investment if things go wrong. As the sole owner of the company, you're in a position to set up collection account management and other mechanisms to make sure that your investors and those with back-end deals all get paid. And if you're the kind of person that likes taking care of people and you don't mind taking over all of these tasks and all of these jobs, and it makes sense for you to go ahead and be the sole owner of the business and then create a sweetheart deal with a person that you would otherwise call a partner, because that makes it so you can be sure that things are going to go smoothly from a business standpoint, and you also get to work with the person that you most want to work with. And meanwhile, they aren't burdened with all of these jobs. So this might be the best of both worlds. In short, what I'm saying is you may not have to be partners. You may just have to decide which one of you is going to own the business and which one of you is going to work with them. Who's the employee, who's going to be the key employee, and who's going to be the guy that owns the business. And the thing is, it may be the case that you decide to switch back and forth, from year to year. You may decide, what, maybe it'd be better, we're thinking about doing 2 films. So let's do one film with one of us as the business owner, and then we'll do the other film with the other of us as the business owner. And then in a way, you're kind of limiting your risks. And you're also making it much easier for the company to go forward on its plans, even if one of you drops out, because you won't be losing an owner, you'll just be losing an employee. So if you allow somebody else to own the business that you're in, the contract with the owner can give you the right to periodic review of the finances, a percentage of the back-end revenues, the right to hire and fire people, an opportunity to meet the investors, and a whole bunch of other business benefits that you thought might only be available to business owners. You, as the employee, can focus on the specific technical operations you most want to undertake, and you can allow someone else to manage the overall hassles of the business. When your work on the project is done, you can move on to your next project rather than having to deal with taxes and monetization and paying people off and repayment and all that stuff. And if the business owner fails to perform as agreed, you can leave the business and you can employ somebody to replace you. And you may still get paid for a lot of the work that you've done, all the services that you've rendered, and you may still get the same back end as you were going to get otherwise. So there's a lot of benefits to being an employee as well as to being the business owner. If you're thinking about becoming partners with somebody, I strongly urge you to think about this notion about letting one of you be the guy that owns the business and letting the other guy be a key employee who has a bunch of contracts that give him a certain set of rights. I really think you're likely to be happier, and I think you'll see that enterprise actually will come together more quickly, and it will be less likely to turn into a legal hassle or a relationship damaging experience for both of you. The other thing I wanted to talk about is that if you and I want to be partners with one another and we want to do multiple projects, it might be the case that we form something called a development company. A development company buys screenplays and it does the initial analysis, budgets, and planning for projects. And then if they decide that they want the project to go forward, they create a production company. They create an LLC. And the interesting thing about doing that is that it can allow a couple of people to find projects that they want to do together, and to acquire the rights and to do all the sort of the prep for the project. And then at that point, they can decide if they want to produce the project as partners, or if one of them wants to take the lead on producing the project and just hire the other guy as a consultant or as an employee on the project, right? So the development company, it, having a development company may let you control the stuff that you care the most about in terms of the scripts, and so forth, without having to also control the production company, because the development company, interestingly enough, can be probably, it's kind of harder to get in trouble. Basically, it just acquires things. It acquires screenplays, and it does budgets, and it does analysis and stuff like that. It does kind of the prep work, but it doesn't actually go into the most risky thing on earth, which is actually production. And if you don't think that production is risky, then you really need to step back, because production is incredibly risky. Whenever you're drawing a bunch of people to a location, and you're going to you're taking risks just because they're coming to a location, and you're responsible for making that location safe, even from one another, because they might make a mistake. One might drop a ladder on the other, or drop a bunch of lights on the other. And as the person that owns the company, you're responsible. And you're responsible for making sure they're all covered with insurance, making sure they all get paid legally, making sure that the company files taxes, making sure that the company pays off its investors, making sure it raised money legally. There's a million things that a production company has to do. A production company has a lot of risk associated with it. A development company, on the other hand, usually it's acquiring things. It's just buying stuff. It's not producing anything, so it doesn't have the same issues with employment or physical risks or insurance or investors. So it may be the case, if you're going to form a partnership for the development company, and then whenever you create each individual project, and you set up the LLC that's going to produce the project, maybe only each partner takes over the LLC instead of both partners owning it together. The final thing I want to mention is that every business relationship ends. Every human relationship ends. And so, in marriages, we talk about till death do us part, right? And certainly your family members, your fathers pass away, eventually, siblings pass away. Every relationship that with humans in it ends. So every partnership ends. And if you're lucky, the most lucky thing that can possibly happen to you is that your partnership with somebody in producing media is so wonderful that the relationship ends when you're both very old, and because one of you passes away. And sort of that's the best possible outcome. And then, as we mentioned before, you have to think about what happens to the intellectual property that you created, because now you and their heirs own it. So if you like the friend and family member that you're working to create a partnership with, it really makes sense to make sure that if the business relationship ends, either because one of you passes away, or because you decide you can't stand working together, or because one of you, it turns out, really is not capable of doing the task that needs to be done in order for the company to survive, it really does make sense to go through the process of building your partnership with a partnership agreement. And one of the ways that I've outlined in this document and in the workbook, it makes sense to go through that process because you do care about them. You want to make sure when you're working with them to build the partnership that you're good and you're rational and you're effective. You want to be a good partner to them even before the partnership starts. You want to make sure that you admit, as you're building the partnership or as the partnership is going forward, when things aren't working. And you want to make sure that you say that kind of thing kindly, and you accept full responsibility for the fact that it might be your fault. And you want to make sure that you prepare before a relationship begins, that it's possible for each of you to exit smoothly in a way that won't hurt the project or unduly, for the person that's going to carry on to complete it, and in a way that won't harm one another. In short, what I'm saying is, if you really care about the person you're going to form a partnership with, you're going to very carefully form it. You're going to be honest with them. You're going to work conscientiously and hard to make sure that the relationship that you build is as good as it possibly can be, and that when all is said and done, if it doesn't work out, that it's possible to leave the partnership or leave the relationship, the business relationship, swiftly and easily and without taking a huge quantity of loss, so that the personal relationship you have remains strong, even if the business relationship doesn't work. If you don't choose to do that, you're literally choosing not to have a personal relationship anymore. You're literally deciding that if the business falls apart, you really don't care about what happened to that brother or to that good friend that you wanted to work with, you wanted to work with for years, your good collaborative partner that you used to bring on to every single project. Well, it would be terrible to lose that person and never be able to work with them again because you were sloppy about trying to create the professional relationship of partnership, or a partnership that you would hope would bring you closer. So you want to be careful as you're forming a partnership, because you do not want to lose friends and you don't want to lose family members by being careless. Written agreements are really important. As much as we love our partners and as much as we love our friends and our family members, if things aren't worth putting in writing, then the partnership isn't worth having. You literally cannot afford not to document the relationship you and your partner have and the understanding that you have, and you can't afford to do that without the help of lawyers. If you don't have the commitment to do that, then you should not become partners, because you're setting yourself up for some pretty expensive mistakes. And the final thing I'd mention is that you may find, after deciding to walk through the partnership process, you may go forward and have a great partnership. It may also be the case that you and your potential partner decide, you know what, we don't want to be partners. We like working closely together. So we're going to try to find ways to work together informally. And there've been a number of people who, although they were not partners, they would always look to people, a certain set of people, over and over and over again for advice and support. And they would find ways to do little deals with people over time in order to get the advice that they needed, or in order to get the insight that they needed. But they didn't turn that into a partnership. They just kind of kept it a close collaborative relationship. And I think a lot of times people think it's partnership or nothing. As you move through the partnership process, if you don't end up being full partners, there's probably several different kinds of relationships that you can create that may give you all the benefits that you're looking for, and none of the things that you don't like. Running a production company has risks. And when you decide you're going to produce a web series, or you decide to produce a feature film, you're taking on a lot of risks. And when you decide to have a partner, that comes with risks as well. So I'm telling you, it's not child's play. It's not friendly in the sense that, if things go wrong, it's going to be okay. It's not going to be okay. It's going to be the opposite of okay. So the stuff that I put into the lecture notes for this project is really designed to make it so that you can ensure that you and your partner actually create a functional relationship that actually is going to be able to get products out the door, is going to be able to get media out the door, is going to be able to acquire content, is going to be able to create content, is going to be able to own that content successfully over time and monetize it over time, and is going to account for what happens to that content if people get divorced or if people die. It's just, I think my objective is to make it so you sidestep a lot of hassles that you otherwise would not be able to accommodate. So I guess that pretty much covers the topics I wanted to talk about. If you have any questions that you haven't run into previously, just go ahead and send me an email at nancy@nancyfultonmeetups.com. I certainly look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks for listening to the Hollywood Insider podcast. If you have questions you'd like answered, guests you would like to suggest, or topics you'd like us to cover, please email Nancy at nancyfultonmeetups.com. If you like what you hear, please click to follow the podcast and give us a kind word in the comments. If you find our thoughts and suggestions help you, please share our podcast with other creators who need help. We love being of service to creative minds. This podcast is produced by No Better Friend Entertainment, and this audio recording was copyrighted in 2024. All rights reserved. Music for this episode is licensed for commercial use from pond5.com.